Hi, everyone. Hi, Jonna.
Hi,
I'm
Liz. How are you?
Liz. They're doing well, trying to stay warm. Thank you for being back with us. Jonna is here from the OSU Extension Office, and she is continuing our virtual cooking series. So, this is the second class for January. You can still watch the first class from last week on either our Facebook page or our YouTube page, the library's Facebook page or the library's YouTube page. And if you join us for all three of the virtual classes, and then the last class of this month is going to be in person at Northside Library, um, then you can get the whole series. So take it away, Jonna.
All right. Well, hi everybody. Welcome back. Liz, you want to put my little introduction slide up there? Thank you. I'm going to continue today, as Liz said, with the second of the series on eating healthy on a budget. So, as you all know by now, my name is Jonna, and I work for the Ohio SNAP Ed program through the Ohio State University and the Ross County Extension Office. And always want to put in our little plugs there for our two websites that I pull most of my recipes and a lot of my information from. The number one being choosemyplate.gov, which is the USDA's website that has just about anything nutrition that you would want to look up online. They're a really great resource for that. It has a lot of great recipes. Anything you need to know about nutrition, it's there. And then the celebrateyourplate.org, which is our SNAP Ed website. That is where I get a lot of my recipes from. And they have good nutritious recipes. They have activities on there. They have cooking tips. There's a lot of different things. They just actually added here in the last couple of weeks 10 new recipes. So if you've been on there before but haven't been for a while, please go check it out. There's some new recipes on there, and you're going to want to check them out. Okay, and then my contact information is there on the screen as well, and you'll have it in the chat box as well. So today our recipe is, we're going to get started right away with it, is a baked meatball. I don't know if you there you can see it. And this will be in the chat box. So if you guys want to either save it to your computer, your phone, whatever, you'll have it there. Or if you got, if you want to go old school like me and print it, you can do that as well. And this is a really good recipe right now. If you've all been to the grocery store, we're all getting sticker shock from how high, especially beef and chicken prices are right now. But all meats across the board are pretty expensive. So if you're feeding a family of 2 or 3, a pound of hamburger will pretty much feed you. But if you're feeding a family of 4, 5, 6, a pound of hamburger is going to be a little skimpy. So by taking your pound of hamburger and turning it into some meatballs, you can throw it with some pasta and sauce. You got a nice, nice meal there. Nice salad, side salad go with it, and you've made that 1 pound of meat stretch out far enough to feed your entire family. So, I got my sauce, talking to sauce, I got my sauce back here. It was boiling a little hard. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started and get these meatballs mixed up. It's really super quick. Our ingredients tonight are, I'm using ground beef, so I've got a pound of ground beef. As you can see, I've packaged this up. I pulled this out of my freezer yesterday, put it in my refrigerator to thaw out slow and safely. And I've got hamburger for tonight's meal. And I always put the date on it, so I make sure I'm rotating my stock. And then it's just going to be an egg, some milk. The recipe calls for onion powder. When I went to the cabinet, all I had was garlic powder, so you can always make substitutions. Some breadcrumbs, which I'm going to show you a little trick on that too here in a second. Some parsley and a little bit of pepper, okay? So really super simple. I've already washed my hands and got them all pretty much sanitized. I'm going to start off by just putting my ground beef into a bowl and put that to the side. Then we'll take a fork and just break it apart and get it kind of fluffed up. So all my ingredients are going to go in there. And then I'm going to take my egg. I'm going to crack it into the bowl. Now, when you're making a meatballs, meatloaf, anything like that, you want to put all your wet ingredients into your bowl first. That way, you're going to have a nice base to put your seasoning into. You don't want to put your seasonings and your breadcrumbs in first, because then you're going to wind up maybe with clumps of flavor or clumps of breadcrumbs in your finished meatball. So you want to make it so, make like a liquid base. So you can see I'm going to mix the meatloaf around. It's real tempting to just put your hands in there, and it is a quicker, easier way. But For sanitation reasons, you may want to make sure you're using a fork. Don't stick your hands in if you don't have to. All right, so next I'm going to add in my seasonings because I want to make sure my seasonings are distributed throughout this mixture. So you want to put it in before the breadcrumbs. So the recipe calls for a teaspoon of onion powder. Well, I got the wrong one. This one's not open yet. Let's see. Aha, I knew I had one that was open. Okay, so a teaspoon of onion powder. So I'm going to cut that to about a half teaspoon of garlic powder because it's a little bit stronger than the onion powder would be, okay? And you see I'm measuring my seasonings out into a separate little bowl. When you put your seasonings in over top of your finished product, you take a chance of possibly over seasoning. So I always make sure I put it in a little bowl and then add it in all together. Then about a quarter teaspoon of just ground black pepper. And this is just the pepper that sits in your shaker on your counter or on your table. And then a teaspoon of dried parsley. Okay, so there we go. Kind of stir those around, get them all mixed up real good. We'll take this and stir it. You want to combine them together, that, like I said, that way they're going to distribute throughout your dish evenly, and you're not going to have any clumps of garlic powder or parsley hanging around in there. And then I'm just going to take my fork and I'm going to stir this all around really quickly. Now, I know you can go to the grocery and you can buy bags of frozen, already made meatballs, and that's great. And they're not too expensive. I think I was looking at the website this morning in one of the grocery stores, and right now you can get them for like $5 for a 12-ounce bag. So that's about 16 to 18 meatballs. But the only thing is when you buy them pre-made like that, you really have no control of what's in them. You have no control over the salt. You have no control over the sugar or maybe some preservatives that they may be putting in there. So you always want to make sure that you are, if you can, cook things from scratch. Okay, I'm going to add in a half a cup. This is a half cup dry measuring cup. And I am measuring this over top of my mixture here because I don't have a bowl handy. I'm sorry. And there's a nice level cup. Put that in. And then we're going to stir these through until your mixture gets nice and dry. Or drier. Oh, there, my oven's hot too. We're ready to pop these in the oven as soon as we get them mixed up. So, as I said, buying the pre-made ones are great, and if I'm not, putting them down. If you find one you really like, that's great. But this is a way you're going to get more meatballs by using your own ground beef, and you can actually flavor these to the way that your family enjoys. So, and you can also make them different flavors for different dishes. If you wanted this to be a spicy meatball, you could put in some cayenne, you could put in some chili powder, you could put in anything you wanted as far as flavorings. Okay. All right, so there you see I got my mixture, and it's not dry. I would call it dry, but it's drier. Now, I've got, let me get all this stuff out of the way here. I've got my baking sheet ready here. I've got some tin foil on it. And I'm going to take just a little bit of cooking spray and spray on this so that my meatballs don't stick. Now, I've got a little meatball maker. Now, you don't have to have one of these, but the idea behind using something like this, it could be a tablespoon, it could be a small measuring cup, anything you have on hand, is to keep these in a uniform size, okay? So I'm going to take this meatball maker, and I'm going to just lay my meatballs out like that, round it up just a little bit, and I'm going to lay them on my baking sheet. See how easy and simple that is? Like making cookies, only it's meatballs. Okay. Now, I know I've got a couple people who watch the classes and follow that may be vegetarians or vegans. So you can make this. I have not personally done it, so I'm not vouching for it completely, but you can make this with the meat substitutes, okay? So you can make really nice meat substitutes out of mushrooms and lentils. There's several different things on the market right now. So if you are following that diet plan and use those on a regular basis, you'll know which ones you can use. And if you're a vegan, obviously you're not going to want to use the egg in there as well. After doing a little bit of research, I have found that you can actually use unsweetened applesauce or even any of the plant-based milks, just a little bit extra to give your meat mixture or your mixture a little bit moisture. you can use those as well to make these a vegan or a vegetarian form, okay? Like I said, I haven't done those. If anybody has and they want to try this recipe and report back and let me know how they turned out, I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. All right, so as you can see, I've got 12 meatballs on here already. Well, soon to be 12. And I still have enough in my pan bowl there to make probably 12 more. So I'm only going to make 12 tonight, but I'm going to put this mixture in the refrigerator and I'll make them up after the class, okay? But I'm going to pop these into the oven for about 12 to 15 minutes is what the recipe calls for. And then once they are done, wipe my hands off there for just a second. Let me set this in the refrigerator so it'll be safe. And once those are done, I want to check them about halfway through because I want to make sure that they're browning evenly. And that's another reason you want to use that that measured spoon or whatever, because you want them to cook evenly. You don't want little tiny dry ones and big meatballs that may not be done, and you make sure you want them all put together, okay? All the same size, I guess I should say. All right, so now I talked about the breadcrumbs. Now, I don't know about you all, but every time I have a loaf of bread in my house, when you get to the end of the bag, there's always these two little pieces that nobody will eat, right? So what do you do with them? Okay, you can throw them out in the backyard to the birds, or you can throw them away, which is a waste. Or, you can maybe, okay, nobody else will eat it, I'll eat it. Or you can toast them up. As you can see, I've already toasted these. They're pretty hard. They're kind of brown. And make your own breadcrumbs. So what I've done is I've toasted these up. And I've got my little mini blender here. I'm just going to take these. And I'm going to break my toast up into manageable sized pieces. After I toasted it, after you toast it, you want to leave them set out so it dries out even more. And then I'm just going to pulse these just a few times in my little blender here. Make sure you get all them big pieces chopped up. Okay. So there we go. I've got breadcrumbs from something that would maybe going to go into the trash can or out to feed the birds. And what I do with these is I have a lot of canning jars. You guys know that I do a lot of my own canning, make my own stuff. I will put these into this canning jar, put a lid on it tight, and then store them in the freezer. Now, you don't really want to leave them set in the cabinet when you make your own, because sometimes you may not get it completely dry, so there will be a little bit of moisture still in some of that bread. So you want to make sure you put it in the freezer. That way you don't have to take a chance of mold or anything growing inside your breadcrumbs. But you can keep a jar of these, going nonstop as you use up your loaf of bread, and that way you're not wasting any of that bread at all. You can make your own breadcrumbs. All right, so I want to talk a little bit. I'm always talking about freezing, right? And I froze my hamburger up into a freezer bag. But there are a lot of different things you can use to freeze in. So I want to show you some different methods. I did forget to set my timer too, guys. That's a good way to burn up your meatballs, isn't it? Let's see. They've been in there for about, let's just set it for 10. Okay. So some of the containers that I use. Let me grab and bring them over here.
What was the full amount of time again, Jonna?
It was 12 to 15 minutes. And they've been in there for a couple minutes, so I'm going to check them here in a second. So when I freeze stuff, there's several different ways you can do, different things you can use. I mean, there are my personal favorite, my good old glass bowls that you can reuse over and over again. They are a expense right up front because you have to purchase them. And you can get a decent set of usually 12 to 18 bowls, different sizes, shapes, and they're going to hold different amounts for usually between $25 and $30. And so it's a big investment to begin with, but I can be honest with you, I've got bowls in my cabinet that I probably have had for 25 years. So that one investment has really served me well. So this is my favorite. This is what I use to serve up, freeze up casseroles, to freeze up soups, anything I'm going to keep, and it will keep in the freezer anywhere from 6 to 8 months, no problem. Okay, and you can burp the air out. So air when you're freezing something is your worst friend. So you want to get as much air out as possible. Secondly, you can use a good old-fashioned reusable plastic containers, and these are great. I use these quite a bit as well. The only thing about them is they're cheaper. Obviously, you can get a nice set for usually $15 to $20, but they do degrade over time. So after a couple years, they're going to get brittle, especially if you use them quite a bit, and they'll break up and they won't be able to seal them tight, or they'll just fall apart on you. So this is something, if you're just starting out in the kitchen, this is a good way to start out, but the glass is my favorite. Or you can use the freezer bags like you saw me using, but make sure it says freezer. You don't want to use just the regular storage bags because they're not a heavier grade of plastic, excuse me, and they're not going to be airtight for as long as what the freezer grade would be. So make sure you're using a freezer grade bag. They're really nice because they've got the little section where you can write on them. And I did forget to tell you, with the bowls, you can always buy what they call freezer tape. And it is tape that you can take off and on easily off your containers, and then you can write on that and just peel it off when you're done. Okay. Or I mean, if the plastic containers, you can write on them, but it's not real pretty after a while. And then there's the old standbys that my mom used to use, the good old plastic wrap or the aluminum foil. These are great for short term. I can remember my mother buying, big old packs of pork chops or something like that and wrapping it up in plastic wrap. But that plastic wrap doesn't stay sealed, and it's only good for maybe 30, 45 days at the max. So for long-term storage, you're not going to want to use either one of these because, number one, they're not airtight, so you're going to have air in there, which is going to let freezer burn get in, or it's just not going to stay wrapped up and you're going to have exposed items in your freezer, okay? So, Liz, if you want to put up my little graphic I gave you about doubling, there you go, great. So I talk a lot about, freezing, making things ahead of time. As you saw, I had enough meatballs there to make, well, for 2 people, that's going to be at least 3 meals, maybe 4, okay? Because those are nice sized meatballs. And, you only really need, and when you're a serving of protein of any kind of meat is going to be 4 ounces, which we've talked about before. It's about the size of the palm of your hand, right? So about 3 to 4 meatballs is going to be a serving. So if you're making these up, I made one batch as far as the recipe is concerned, but I can freeze the rest of them. Now, if I was cooking for a family of 4 or 5, that's not going to be enough to really freeze enough for a whole lot of meals, right? So I may want to double that recipe. That means I'm going to take everything and make, 2 pounds of hamburger. I'm going to use a cup of milk instead of a half a cup. I'm going to use double of everything, except one thing. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So number one thing when you're going to double or cut a recipe in half is to read the entire recipe. That should be a rule of thumb, even if you're not even if you're just doing a recipe, especially for the first time, read that recipe from start to finish. That is going to make sure that, number one, you've got all your ingredients, you know what to expect. Number 2, you're not going to hopefully skip a step. It's real easy to get halfway through your recipe or even get the food in the oven or almost done and realize I left out a major ingredient because I didn't read the recipe. So read your recipe and make sure you're aware of everything you need. And then when you're doubling a recipe or cutting a recipe in half, I always take a separate piece of paper and go through and automatically change my amounts. So like I needed a half a teaspoon of parsley for this recipe. So to double it, in theory, you're going to need a teaspoon, right? And it's real easy. Our brains will automatically do what we read. So if you're reading through this regular recipe here, and you're just doing it in your head as you go along, it'd be real easy to, if you're having this recipe, to say, okay, I need a tablespoon of that. When if you're cut in half, you'll need half a tablespoon, and you're over seasoning your dish. So take a separate piece of paper, take all your ingredients, write down the amounts you're going to need. That way you're going to cut down the chance of making a mistake and either under seasoning or over seasoning your meal. So do not automatically double those spices and seasonings though, because spices and seasonings go a long way. And if you especially like cayenne, chili powders, the ones that are really spicy, if you automatically double that, you may get more than you need. So start off with, if you're making a pot of soup and it calls for a tablespoon of chili powder, don't automatically do 2 tablespoons, maybe do 1.5, and then if you need to put more in, you can. Now, obviously, for these meatballs, you couldn't do that because it was a set mix, right? And I put it in the oven. So if I was doubling those, instead of using the teaspoon of onion powder, I would use maybe 1 1/4 or 1 1/2. You can half it, but don't take it to the whole double amount. Little bit, you can always season a little bit more at the table, but once it's in there, you can't take it out, right? And then always remember, if you're doubling a recipe, to use a bigger pot, bigger bowl, because it might tell you to use a three-quart pan. Well, if you're doubling it, you're going to need 6 quart, and you're halfway through there, and you got all this stuff in the pan. Like, oh, I don't have enough room for this. You can't stir it, right? So make sure you're doubling the size of your utensils. And then remember, your cooking times may vary. So especially for like casseroles and large bake items, it might take a little bit longer for that item to cook. So you're going to have to babysit it. Speaking of which, let's check on our meatballs here. Okay, they're turning brown. They're looking good. All right, so back to the slide, Liz. Thank you. So always make sure that you are checking them frequently when you're doubling or cutting a recipe in half to make sure you're not either undercooking or overcooking. Use a thermometer to ensure that you're getting to proper temperatures. That is one thing. You can find those meat temperatures on the myplate.gov website. For any ground meats, though, like these meatballs, it should be internally 165 degrees. So anytime you're using a ground meat of any kind, make sure you're checking it with a thermometer and you're cooking it to 165 degrees internally, not on the outside. And then the same thing holds true for having a recipe. I know I've kind of mishmashed these together, but you write down your measurements. Remember, you might need to convert cups to tablespoons or teaspoons. So, if it only calls for 1/8 of a cup, you're going to have to figure out how many teaspoons are in 1/8 of a cup. So have a calculator handy. Of course, those little voice prompts on your phone are great too. You can always say, "Hey Siri, how much do I need of this?" So that's always a good tool to have in the kitchen with you too. And you do want to cut the amounts of the seasonings in half or less when you're making half of a recipe, because like I said, those strong seasonings can really overpower if you're not careful. And then you may have to reduce the cooking time because you're going to have a smaller amount. Now, if you have like a big casserole, you're cutting that in half, it may not need to cook for that hour. It may only need to cook for 35, 40 minutes. So keep a close eye on it. And once you do it a couple times, you'll know, and it's always good to keep that piece of paper and just rewrite that recipe if it's going to be something that you're going to half or double all the time, okay? All right, Liz. I hope that wasn't too confusing. I feel like I was kind of rushing through that. Was there any questions popped up anywhere?
Nope, no questions popped up.
Okay.
I think that was a really good idea to write everything down, though.
Oh, yeah.
I have several times started through either doubling or having a recipe, and then I get to the end and I say to myself, oh, wait, I either didn't double or didn't have one of those ingredients.
Right. And I mean, it's our brains are geared. What you're reading at that point is what you're doing. So if you just take the regular recipe, it's like, oh, okay, I need a tablespoon. Well, no, I didn't quite need that much, or maybe I needed more. So, yeah, I learned that lesson.
And if you're reading through the whole thing, you also see if there are any pitfalls. Like if it asks for 1 egg, it's really hard to cut 1 egg in half.
Exactly.
So that might not be a recipe that you can have as easily.
There's ways to get around that. You can always use the egg. You can buy like the cartons of eggs, or you can actually take a couple eggs and scramble them and take some out. So I mean, there's ways to get around that, but you gotta always make sure you're keeping your options open. All right, let me. There goes the timer off. Let's pull these meatballs out and see how they're done. Make sure you guys can see what I'm doing here. Ooh, they smell great. All right. Now, I don't have my thermometer here handy, but I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way. I'm going to take a fork and cut into one of these. And yes, it is cooked through. So let's plate this stuff up. Let me show you how good this can be. I've already made up some pasta. I got it up here staying warm. I didn't cook it in the microwave in this metal pan, obviously, but it was staying warm up there. Let me take my fork. Now I've got some pasta here already made up. This is whole wheat pasta, so this is going to be a good way to get your whole grains in for the day. All right. Then I'm going to, I'll use the meatball that I mutilated on my plate here. Now I will take the rest of these meatballs and I will put them in a container As I said, I will put them into the freezer. Let me get us my little ladle here. I've got my pasta sauce. Now, this is just a jarred sauce, but you can make, there is a really good recipe for a nice pasta sauce on the Celebrate Your Plate website, so make sure you check that out, which is really easy. You make stuff that you've already got in your pantry. Then I'm just going to take that and ladle that over top my meatballs and my spaghetti. And then I've got some grated Parmesan in the refrigerator that's going to go on top of this. But what do you think, guys? And you saw how fast those went together. Okay, I made those from start to finish in 30 minutes. So I know what's in them. I know exactly how big they are, so I know how to plan my meals around them. And I can flavor these any way I wanted. If I wanted to make this more of an Italian version, I could use Italian seasoning. As I said before, if I wanted to make them spicy, I could use cayenne. I could use some buffalo seasoning. Whatever you want to put in them, you could just season them with. This is just a good base recipe for a really good meatball. All right, guys.
It looks delicious, Jonna.
I know. I'm hungry already.
So what's our question for today?
Okay, our question for today, and as just as last week, you guys can either email me, a couple people did that, and send me their answers, and I'll keep track for them, or you can write this down on a piece of paper and bring it with you to class 4 where we meet at the library. The question today, what are the disadvantages of prepackaged foods? Okay, the answers are A, unhealthy additives, B, cost per serving, C, environmentally unfriendly packaging, or D, all the above. And of course, I'm going to give you the answer. It's all the above, right? So write that down and bring it with you when you come to see us on week 4, and you'll get your free cooking utensil, and we'll have a lot of fun hanging out and maybe get to discuss some of these things that we're doing these 3 weeks.
All right. Well, thanks, Jonna. Do you have a preview for next week? Do you know what you're doing next week?
I'm kind of on the fence. I had to change a few things around for some programming, so it's going to be yummy. I'll give you a heads up that way. It's going to taste good. I wouldn't steer you wrong, I promise. But it will be more budgeting and ways to make your food dollars stretch. So stop in and see what we're doing.
Very good. Well, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
You too. Thanks.
Stay warm
Bye-bye,
out
everybody.
there.
Oh, yeah. Bye-bye,
Bye, everyone.